What does it truly mean to be a Yonko? The term Yonko level gets thrown around casually in power scaling debates, but I assure you that it has very little to do with individual power. Buggy is a Yonko, yet he is still a pre-timeskip Luffy victim. There are even characters who are certainly as strong as the Yonko like Mihawk, but he prefers a life of peace and tranquility, which is interesting as it implies Mihawk believes being a Yonko is basically a huge headache. I mean, he's not wrong, right? You can only become a Yonko when you've gathered enough influence and manpower that basically amounts to your own personal army. Which sounds cool at first, but an army is a lot of responsibility. It must be properly maintained and properly controlled. One does not just lead an army without gaining a few gray hairs. Bottom line is, it's quite stressful to be that important. I mean, look at Sengoku for example. He is the closest thing to a Yonko within the Navy, and he is enjoying retirement thoroughly because of it. The events of Marineford alone turned his fully black hair to all white just like that. Speaking of Marineford, we get a deeper glimpse of what it means to be a Yonko through Whitebeard. Through him, we learn that being a Yonko means that you are obligated to crash out if even one of your underlings are in trouble, simply because your name and power is tied to the safety of those around you. If Whitebeard allowed Ace to get hurt, he allows his reputation to be hurt along with it, and this can have disastrous consequences on the islands that depend on his reputation to survive. We learn that being a Yonko means you are at the mercy of your own clout. The narrative keeps reminding us that when you have as much influence as a Yonko, you will live and die by the weight of your name. So to be a good Yonko means that you understand the weight of what you represent and act accordingly. This is something a Yonko like Shanks embodies the most. Shanks is very aware of his Yonko status and is very observant of what he represents. We can see this within the makeup of his fleet, which are composed of weaker elderly members. Now, at first, this may sound like a dumb move from Shanks to have such a weak fleet, but in actuality, it is actually a genius PR move. Shanks understands that his fleet is representative of him. If he has weaker members who are non-threatening, then he will be viewed as a caring and compassionate Yonko. I believe this is why Shanks had the lowest bounty out of all the original Yonko, because although he had the power that the others have, his fleet is for the most part viewed as much less threatening than the others. This is important because Shanks does not want unwanted attention from the world government, and having elderly weak pirates ensures he's never viewed as a genuine threat to the world government's power. Now, with this little PR stunt in place, Shanks can do as he pleases since he won't be on the radar of world powers vying for supremacy. But don't get it twisted, that doesn't mean everyone on Shanks' fleet is weak. In chapter 1079, it was stated by Killer that there are some big names in there too. So with all that being said, it seems like Shanks has been very calculated with who he chooses to join his fleet and their organizational makeup. In fact, I would go as far as saying that Shanks uses his fleet as a method of deception. I believe there are much more powerful members hidden within the shadows that Shanks doesn't exactly claim to be his underlings, while he intentionally claims the weaker members to give the facade that his fleet is much weaker than they actually are. See, this is how a true Yonko shows awareness and control over his own influence and name. But now you may be thinking, is this the only way to be a good Yonko? Why can't a good Yonko display a more free leadership style like Luffy, who lets his underlings do as they please? We see an example of Luffy's free-willing leadership in chapter 800. Luffy tells the Grand Fleet, look, I just want to be the king of the pirates. I don't want to be some kind of big shot. I'll just call for your help when I need it the most, and you call for my help when you need it the most. This shows us that Luffy doesn't want any form of management over his fleet. He simply wants to see them as friends to call on. This is emphasized by Bartol, who explains that to Luffy, being Pirate King is not about being big, but about being free. Now, all of this sounds sweet and dandy at first, but upon further analyzation, this is actually a horrible way to lead an army. See, the biggest thing we learn from Shanks is that what your fleet does is reflective of you. We see this in chapter 1127 when he reprimands Bartolomeo for doing bad things in Luffy's name. He tells Barto that because of what he did in his territory in Luffy's name, Luffy is now to blame and must deal with the consequences. Although although this was a test by Shanks of Bartow's loyalty to Luffy, what Shanks said is very much a serious reality. Bartow literally has a flagship of Luffy's goofy face for everyone to see. If Bartow is going around spreading fire to towns, it is equivalent to Luffy going around spreading fires to towns. Through Shanks, we learned that being a Yonko means you are not only responsible for yourself, but for every single person who uses your name or carries your banner. With that being said, I've often wondered, does Luffy know what it truly means to be a Yonko? See, in that chapter, Shanks seems to imply that Luffy is being very careless with understanding the weight of his influence. I mean, he has absolutely no idea that one of his underlings is antagonizing the person he respects the most. Luffy has no idea that Bartow is disrespecting Shanks due to his lack of control of his own men. So to answer the question, I don't think Luffy truly knows what it means to be a Yonko at all. And I hypothesize that this will come back to bite him in the butt very soon. As a matter of fact, it has begun to become a problem already in the most recent chapter. In chapter 1029, it has been revealed that the sun god who has been antagonizing the Straw Hats is none other than Road, a member of the New Giants Pirate. This is relevant because the New Giant Pirates are a member of Luffy's Grand Fleet. So for all intents and purposes, Road is basically Luffy's underling. Now this is where it gets weird, right? We know that Road seems to be experimenting with normal humans and pretending to be their god. We also know that many humans have died in this process, as we can see many skull and bones where they have been eaten by the giant animals. I mean, what Road is doing on this island is some Enel level sociopathy and villainy. The reason why this is weird is, again, this is technically someone under Luffy's banner, which means if this were to ever come to light, Luffy would be painted as the ultimate villain here, especially with Big News Morgan's tendency to exaggerate any news surrounding Luffy. I can just imagine him creating a title along the lines of Straw Hat Fleet Member tortures humans on remote island. See, this is what Shanks is warning Bartow of. If any of the fleet members do malicious things in their own accord, it will all go back to Luffy in the end. Now, I want to take a second to point out how poetic the situation with Road is here. It's important to point out that Road is pretending to be the sun god and doing villainous things in the sun god's name. This is poetic because Luffy is the real sun god, and Luffy is also technically Road's boss. So Road is basically pretending to be Luffy while he's doing all these nefarious deeds. See, this is why being a Yonko is such a headache, as Mihawk mentioned. When you become a Yonko, you are no longer the sole owner of your own identity. So this means that your underlings can start trouble across the world in a place you are not even involved in. But because they represent you, you are basically seen as their mastermind every time. We get an earlier example of what this looks like in Egghead. During the Reverie flashback, we get the most impactful representation of troublesome things being done in Luffy's name. In the Holy Land, we have two members of the Grand Fleet in Leo and Sai attacking a celestial dragon right in front of everyone. I mean, they quite literally almost massacred that boy. This is a huge deal because, again, the blame for this can be easily pinned on Luffy. So this will be seen as Luffy's second attempted murder of a celestial dragon. But the gravity of the situation is even more realized with what happens next. Because of Saint Misgard playing a hand at attacking Saint Charlos, he was executed by Saint Figureland. So ultimately, the member of Luffy's Grand Fleet caused a chain of events that led to the eventual death of a celestial dragon, which is basically equivalent to Luffy murdering a celestial dragon successfully for the first time. So Luffy will now be pinned with 2 attempted murders and 1 successful murder of the gods of this world, all without him even knowing what's going on. Do you see the trend that Oda continues to set here? Luffy, because of his lack of awareness, is causing chaos around the world through his name alone. With all this being said, I believe Oda is subtly hinting at the fact that Luffy has been a very sloppy and incompetent Yonko. Oda is telling us that despite the fact that Luffy has the power of a Yonko, he has not at all begun to grasp what it means to be one, thus failing in really being a good Yonko when it counts the most. I theorize that this failure to be a good leader will have disastrous consequences moving forward for for Luffy and the crew as a whole. I believe this character flaw will be one of the biggest narrative focuses as we move on to Elbaf, especially since it seems Oda is pushing this message home so much lately. I mean, he damn near used Zoro to say exactly what I'm trying to convince you of here. In chapter 1124, Zoro speaks on Luffy's attitude towards Vegapunk's death with some seemingly harsh words. He says it's pathetic, he's an emperor now, an old man dying shouldn't affect him that badly. On the surface, this may just sound like Zoro being a green grump as normal, but when you take a second to think about it, Zoro does make a lot of sense. Luffy is no longer a leader of a small ragtag group of friends. He is now the head of a 5,000 man army. He cannot risk showing weaknesses, or he may risk causing a ripple effect to anyone who looks at him as a pillar of strength or as a leader of an organization. Luffy represents something beyond his easygoing childish nature now, and he has yet to come to terms with it and act accordingly. This is why I theorize that Luffy will face the consequences of being a Yonko very soon. But what exactly does that look like? Well, first and foremost, I believe this consequence will be handed out by none other than the God Knights. Reason being is Luffy has basically forced Garling, the former leader of the God Knights, to kill a celestial dragon, which basically means Luffy is the reason why the God Knights have been mobilized. Garling coming out to deal with Luffy's mess suggests that the Knights may be now mobilized to attack the Straw Hats, but I don't think it's in personally attacking the Straw Hats where Luffy will face the biggest consequences, but rather it will be through the God Knights attacking Luffy's territories. I believe the God Knights will be mobilized to destroy Luffy's influence all around the world by attacking every single island he has ever sworn to protect. Islands such as Wano, Fishman Island, Zoo, or even Dressrosa. I believe this is the most impactful consequence Oda has in store for Luffy, because we all know Luffy and the crew can protect themselves, but we can't say the same for the countries their name protects. The Holy Knights will naturally attack the soft spots in Luffy's armor, which is of course the people he loves and swore to protect. I believe this will have a major effect on Luffy because we've seen already how emotional Luffy gets when he hears that one of his friends is in danger and he's incapable of helping, as we saw very early on with Ace and as we saw more recently with Fifi. But with all this being said, I don't even think this will be the biggest consequence of being a bad Yonko. In fact, I believe the more deadly consequence is what Shanks has shown us with Barto. Let's go back to the test of loyalty that he gave Barto. Shanks' crew gave him poison to give to Luffy to make amends for the chaos they've caused. Now, although Barto was very loyal here and didn't give Luffy the poison, I can't help but acknowledge that not everybody is as loyal. More specifically, not everybody on Luffy's fleet is as loyal. I mean, we just got a huge example with a member of the New Giant Pirates saying that he disagreed with Hiruden joining Luffy's fleet. Ultimately, someone like Road has no reason to hold such loyalty to Luffy. Now, let's say for example, it was Road in place of Barto. Would he have taken the poison in Luffy's place as Barto did? I do not think so. Not in the slightest. On the contrary, I think Road would agree to feed Luffy the poison to protect his own neck. See, that's truly the biggest consequences of being a Yonko. Not knowing who is going to betray you amongst your vast number of people under your banner. I mean, this is a narrative theme that is consistent throughout the whole story. Almost every Yonko has been betrayed to some degree. The most obvious example is Squard stabbing Whitebeard in the back. In fact, Whitebeard has 2 cases of betrayal when you count Blackbeard as well. But it's not only him that this has happened to. Kaido and Big Mom has had this happen to them as well. Big Mom got betrayed by Beijing, who she thought was her loyal underling. Even Kaido has been betrayed by ex-Drake in Wano. Oda has shown us in multiple instances where Yonkos have grown sloppy with their recruiting, and it has come back to bite them in the butt big time. And we may yet see another example of this with Blackbeard, as we all suspect Aokiji to betray him in the future, and it's only a matter of time. See, when you are a Yonko with sloppy leadership, the recurring consequence is being stabbed in the back. Luffy has yet to experience this, but I believe that Road here is foreshadowing from Oda that a member of the Grand Fleet may betray Luffy in the future, as we've seen with countless other Yonko before. Then, and only then, Luffy will feel the heavy consequences of being a Yonko. That's the theory, guys. Hope you enjoy watching. As always, make sure to like the video and subscribe, and I'll see you next time in the next middleweight theory.